Dobar dan i dobrodošli na čajanku. Već smo odmakli sa programom, ali ne postaje nimalo manje zanimljivo. To ću ovako da kažem sada, da garantujem ne mogu, jer je naravno to subjektivno, ali ja očekujem da će biti veoma zanimljivo predavanje danas. Naša gošća je Francesca Rolandi iz Italije, da kažemo sada trenutno u Firenci radi na jednom ERC projektu, a inače je iz Milana, studirala i doktorirala u Torinu i istoričarka po profesiji, bavi se prevashodno istorijom našeg regiona, da ne kažemo sad samo istorije Jugoslavije. U prvom delu svoje karijere doktorat je bio o odnosima Italije i Jugoslavije i nakon Drugog svjetskog rata, a trenutno je na jednom projektu koji se bavi, gde isti je period, taj hladnoratovski, ili posle između 45. i 90. o učešću i ulozi Jugoslavije u humanitarnim intervencijama i u stvari humanitarne pomoći, ceo taj koncept koji je, mislim, deo jednog šireg istraživačkog projekta. Mnogo mi je drago što je Francesca danas tu iz više razloga. Sve je počelo, ja ću malo da, bez namere da vas sada mnogo zadržavam sa detaljima, ali je za mene malo ovo jedno ispalo kao da sam upoznala jednu autorku koju nisam poznavala, ali sam imala želju, možda se to i vama dešava, kada čitate neku dobru knjigu i onda mislite ovu osobu bi baš volila da upoznam. Moje upoznavanje sa Franceskom je krenulo pre godinu dana, kada mi je moj dragi prijatelj koji je danas tu, Vladimir Bilandžić, za rođendan poklonio ovu knjigu. I ja sam bila čula za tu knjigu, ali nisam bila čitala, niti još kupila, nisam ni znala da je bila objavljena na srpskom. I ja sam tu knjigu onda pročitala zaista u jednom dahu i puno je tu bilo stvari koje su probudile tu želju da upoznam ovu autorku i to je sada naša privilegija u akademskom svetu da možemo ipak da se obratimo jednim drugima i kada je počelo planiranje ove čajanke, vrlo brzo sam znala da bih žela da Francesca bude jedna od govornika i tako sam je i kontaktirala i vrlo brzo smo uspostavili kontakt i upoznali se i na srećom Francesca je pristala da dođe i da govori ovde na čajanci. Ovu knjigu koju zaista jako preporučujem, Geopoetika je izdala 24.000 poljubaca. Je jedna knjiga koja je pre svega, zapravo ima više stvari koje je ona pre svega, ali recimo prva da je ona po savremenom nekom savremena istorijska metodologija istorije ili istoriografije je zaista ovde dolazi do izražaja. Ovo je jedna tako temeljno urađena knjiga koja prevazilazi samo deskripciju, već i zalazi u stvari u jedan kritički osvrt koji pri tome ima jedan tako po meni fin dah nečega što nije osuđivanje, nije jedno suđenje o nečemu, već je jedno lepo pripovedanje i to je malo se, ovaj uvod koji sada i kažem poklapa sa, imali smo u prvom predavanju ovog serijala Radinu Vučetić i njenu knjigu o Marioli Veri i tada sam i za tu knjigu toliko ima paralela gde je u stvari uzeta jedna stvar ili od Ildiko Erbej. To su knjige koje uzimaju jedan istorijski događaj i opisuju ga detaljno, ali u stvari daju jednu mnogo širu sliku o objektu posmatranja, da tako sad kažem, vrlo šturo naučniku. I tako i u ovoj knjizi koja gleda na odnos Italije i Jugoslavije u periodu od 20-30 godina, ali zapravo nam mnogo više kaže o periodu i pre i o periodu posle. I to ovu knjigu po meni čini jako dragocenom. I pri tome Francesca, moram da kažem, iz tih redova izbija jedna velika skromnost, a ona u stvari je, mislim, skromnost je kao što znamo znak ljudi koji mnogo znaju, ali nisu možda toga ni svesni, ali je knjiga ima jako puno detalja koji upravo ukazuju na jedan pristup toj temi i pristup Jugoslaviji koji nažalost je bio nestao pogotovo nakon raspada Jugoslavije. Knjige koje smo čitali o Jugoslaviji, o istoriji Jugoslavije su imali uvek jedan ton koji možda bih mogla da kažem, iako ću možda bi zvučiti sada previše previše dominantno kao objašnjenja, ali ton je uvek jedno vreme bio jako agresivan i uvek se polazilo od tog kraja Jugoslavije, a ovo je jedna knjiga koja u stvari ima jedan vrlo suptilan ton i ne polazi uopšte od toga da se Jugoslavija raspala, nego posmatra taj period kao da se Jugoslavija nikada i nije raspala, a pri tome zadržava jedan kritički pogled na tu temu i na Jugoslaviju. Znači, nije nostalgična, ali sa jednom ljubavlju gleda na ono na što se odnosi. I to je ono što je mene jako dotaklo, na stranu što sam puno naučila, dotaklo me u stvari taj pristup da se o toj temi priča nepristupno. Ni u pozitivnom, ni u negativnom, odnosno i u pozitivnom, i u negativnom. Druga, naravno, stvar, ja imam lične, porodične veze sa Italijom, naravno, to je meni onda bilo i dodatni jedan, kako kažem, dodatno interesantno. Vratila sam se čitajući ovu knjigu neke naše porodične diskusije o istoriji Italije, gde sam dobila dobre argumente konačno da ih iskoristim ili da ih upotrebim, tako da je i sa te strane to bilo za mene to je jedan lični. A treću ću ostaviti za kraj. Zašto? Ako bude kontekst i ako bude prilika da vam otkrijem. Sada ću predati reč Franceski, koja je inače, moram da kažem, u jednom trenutku želela da priča u stvari o nečem drugom, zato što je ovo već dosta 10 godina već ima kad je ova knjiga na italijanskom objavljena, ali je i naravno imala je prirodnu potrebu da priča o temi o kojoj trenutno radi, kao što svi mi više volimo da pričamo, ali ja sam ipak, odnosno napravili smo neki hibridni oblik da se malo ipak dotakne i ovoga, jer mislim da je za nas ovde i za vas u stvari zanimljivije, odnosno zanimljivo da se čuje, ali će se dotaći u svom predavanju i svojih trenutnih istraživanje i uklopiti sve u jedno. Eto. Hvala još jedan put na dolasku. Francesca će govoriti na engleskom, iako je njen srpsko-hrvatski odličan, ali razumem da je ipak malo lakše da piše engleskom.
Dobar dan, kao što je Irena rekla, predavanje će biti na engleskom, ali dozvolite mi da se zahvaljujem na srpskom. Velika mi je čast da budem deo ove regionalne čajanke i hvala institutu na pozivu i hvala Ireni na lepim rečima i na pomoći oko oblikovanja sadržaja ove prezentacije. Actually, I will start with some glamour because I will unveil the background of the visits that Sofia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida paid to Tito in the 1970s. Actually, in 1970, Sofia Loren and her husband, the producer Carlo Ponti, contacted the Yugoslav embassy in Rome to inquire whether it was possible to vacation in Briuni at their expenses. And the reply was no, because Briuni is no holiday resort. And the Yugoslav establishment didn't want to create a precedent, but the response was a 10-day invitation that the couple accepted. And we all are familiar with that very popular picture. On the other side of the screen, we can see Gina Lollobrigida, who visited Tito in 1973 upon her request. And in the request, she mentioned the fact that she regarded Tito as one of the most outstanding personalities of that time, and that she considered Yugoslavia her second homeland, also because her son was half Yugoslav. So I decided to start with these two pictures because I thought that somehow they epitomize how the relations between Italy and Yugoslavia went beyond diplomatic context, they went beyond economic cooperation, and they permeated other spheres. And I think that the intrinsic message was that the Italian star system and the Yugoslav establishment were somehow part of the same dream world. They could talk, they could spend time together, and more broadly, that countries were not that far away from each other. So in this presentation, I will try to bring together the results of two different projects. The first project is the one that Irena just mentioned on the influence of Italian popular culture on Yugoslavia, which was the topic of my PhD research. And the other topic is related to humanitarianism and humanitarian aid that Italy and Yugoslavia sent to each other from the 1960s in cases of natural disasters. So I will use these two case studies to reflect on how bilateral relations between Italy and Yugoslavia had a particular path during the Cold War. And I will also try to reflect on relations between countries divided by a troubled political past. And additionally, I will try to position this research within historiography on Yugoslavia and try to deconstruct rigid boundaries between area studies. So a couple of words on the historical context. The historical context was that of the so-called Adriatic détente. From the early 1960s, Italy and Yugoslavia embarked on a path of rapprochement, which became, it started quietly, but it became voiced the political project already in the 1970s, and to some extent it anticipated Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik and the European Detente. So let's take a step behind and deploy a long-term perspective to situate this Adriatic detente within the history of the Italo-Yugoslav relation in the course of the 20th century. I would start in 1918. We can see that there was a harsh competition for the Adriatic coast, which was won by Italy, which managed to get the entire upper Adriatic area, which was a multinational area inhabited by population speaking Italian, Slovene, and Croat. The interwar period was a period of discrimination, which turned into forced Italianization with the establishment of the fascist regime in 1922, which resulted in the ban on the use of the Slavic languages and in a wide opposition towards the Italian state and the fascist regime among Slovenes and Croats. So out-migration, many people left the area to reach the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, or South America. There were other phenomena, such as, for instance, guerrilla actions enacted by Yugoslav nationalists against the targets identified with the Yugoslav state. So that was the situation in the interwar period, which escalated during the Second World War, when Italy occupied Yugoslavia and contributed to its dismembering. It annexed some areas, while other areas were occupied by the Italian army. And these events triggered the vortex of violence between the occupying armies and the local collaborators on one hand, and the Yugoslav partisans on the other. During that conflict, the Italian army also interned a huge number of Yugoslav civilians, around 100,000, in the framework of anti-partisan repression. In 1945, Yugoslavia took control of the Slovenian littoral, Istria, Rijeka, and Zadar. In May 1945, the Yugoslav army also took control of Trieste and Gorica, but after 40 days, it was compelled to withdraw upon international pressure. And it was in this context, immediately after the end of the Second World War, that post-war reprisals took place against those who were identified with the fascist machinery, or those who actively opposed the annexation of those areas to Yugoslavia. And in Italian, these phenomena are known as foibe. Foibe are crust pits in which allegedly bodies of those killed were thrown. In that tense situation, it was impossible to reach an international consensus on the territorial settlement. So, the situation was quite complicated. In 1945, two zones were created, Zone A and Zone B, respectively, under Anglo-American and under Yugoslav military administration. They lasted until 1947, when there was the peace treaty, but also, again, with the peace treaty, it was impossible to reach a compromise on these two narrower zones, Zone A, including Trieste, and Zone B, so that the northwestern part of Istria, so two other zones were created. And this situation was temporarily solved only in 1954 with the London Memorandum of Understanding, which marked the de facto integration of Zone A and Zone B into Italy and Yugoslavia, respectively. And this settlement will become permanent only with the Osimo Treaty in 1975, so exactly 30 years after the end of the Second World War. So all these events were part of a twofold transition that this territory is experiencing, which was a transition, a shift in state sovereignty, and also the establishment of the communist regime. And everything had a profound impact on the area, which resulted in huge demographic change, with a consistent amount of the local population who left for Italy and overseas location. And in Italian, this phenomenon is known as exodus. So using a biblical term. So in the early days of the Cold War, the relations between the two countries were marked by mutual hostility, which was triggered by territorial claims, but also by ideological division. Communism and anti-communism came to be identified with the two shores of the Adriatic Sea. However, as soon as these tensions were partially overcome, cultural, economic, and only later political relations were gradually restored. This was not a straightforward path, so the relations were serpentine until 1975, especially in the wake of the two territorial settlements in 1954 and 1975, there were crises, but as soon as the Treaty of Osimo was signed in 1975, any obstacle was removed, and the relationships between the two countries were widely framed as friendship, Adriatic friendship, and an outstanding example of mutual comprehension. Now I'm putting Massimo Bucarelli, a model of peaceful cooperation between two countries governed by different social and political systems, but belonging to the same geographical area. So I investigated the topic of Italian pop culture, the influence of Italian pop culture on Yugoslavia for my PhD dissertation, and I wanted to spend a couple of words on this choice, because at that time I wanted to prepare a research project, and I wanted to do something connected with the transnational history of Italy and Yugoslavia, because that was the way I wanted to position myself as an Italian researcher who at that time was based in the post-Yugoslav territory. And when I started taking stock of existing literature, I was struck by the fact that at that time, almost all existing research, it was in the late 2000s, so almost all existing research focused on times of conflict between the two countries, basically the Second World War and the interwar period. And there were very, very few studies, maybe only one, looking at instances of cooperation, coexistence, and good neighborly relations. And I think that this was probably connected with two tropes that had been attached to the post-Yugoslav area. One is the trope violence, which was somehow connected with the wars in the 1990s, in which the term Balkans and became kind of synonym for violence. But the other reason is quite connected with the Italian culture of memory, because there was another narrative that gained traction in the Italian public memory from in the post-1989 period. We are in a time of huge changes of historical revisionism. We all know that this implied in former socialist countries, this implied the rediscovery of topics which had been ostracized during socialist times. In Western Europe, this meant a shift in the main discourse on the Second World War and the post-Second World War period, shifting from the anti-fascist paradigm to the paradigm of victimhood. And the historian Mila Orlic explored how this played out in the upper Adriatic context. So Foibe and Exodus became among the main pillars of the Italian public memory and the Italian narrative on the Second War, because Italians were framed as victims of Yugoslav totalitarianism. And for instance, in the institutionalized culture of memory, we have two remembrance days. We have a day to commemorate the victims of the Shoah, which is at the end of January. And after a couple of days, we have another day of remembrance to commemorate the suffering of the Italians from Istria, Fiume, and Dalmatia. So there is a kind of implicit parallelism between Nazi fascism and communism. And in this discourse, all the responsibilities for the Nazi fascist crimes are ascribed to Germany. So this was the context in which I started my research. It was a context in which the word Yugoslavia somehow sounded sinister to many, like the Italy's historical enemy. But when I went to the archives and I started delving into documents and into the press of that time, I came across a really different picture, because I came across an atmosphere of neighborly relations in the making, especially for the period starting from the mid-1950s, which is a kind of prehistory of the Adriatic Department. And for my PhD project, which later resulted in that book, I decided to focus on the period between the mid-1950s and the mid-1960s, because I thought that the Italo-Yugoslav relations had a symbolic meaning in that time span. Because the rapprochement between the two countries, which was a later rapprochement, because Italy was the last Western country to normalize its relation with socialist Yugoslavia. But after the mid-1950s, this somehow entangled with a time of increased liberalization and opening up towards the Western world. And in particular, my argument is that popular culture played a crucial role in fostering this sense of proximity. Although this relation was uneven, it was a one-directional trend, but later I will try to explain why, in my view, it was uneven. It was mostly Italian cultural trends which reached Yugoslavia, and not the other way around. But Italian pop and rock music, Italian films, Italian divas, Italian TV shows became part of the mental map of Yugoslav citizens. And I think that what attracted the most were two elements. So Italian pop culture acted as a filter for wider Western trends. And the rock scene, the Italian rock scene was a good example because Italian interpreters, Italian rockers, the so-called urlatori, brought into Yugoslavia a milder version of rock and roll, which preserved the sound, but mitigated the subversive message that rock and roll had in the UK and in the US. So Italy really had this role as a filter for wider trends. And this made the Italian popular culture more acceptable also in Yugoslavia because it was, for instance, Italian rockers, they didn't fight against their parents. They didn't have dissolute behaviors. And that's what the Yugoslav leadership wanted for their children. And that's also what the Italian leadership wanted for their children. And it was also accepted by kids, at least in that time, because in the following decade, starting from the mid-1960s, everything will change. And this clash between generation will become very significant in both countries. But still, Italian pop culture represented a model which was acceptable, and it was also accessible more than other popular cultures, because at that time it was possible to listen to rock and roll coming from the United States, but US musicians rarely visited Yugoslavia, while Italian rockers had long tours in Yugoslavia. And also Italy was accessible in terms of mobility. And here Trieste comes. I mean, shopping tourism in Trieste. Trieste became a synonym for consumerism and became part of the Yugoslav consumer culture. That picture was taken on the Rive in Trieste. It was more or less like that every Sunday. The city was crowded with Yugoslav tourists. And many Yugoslavs used their passports only to go and buy jeans in Trieste, but this practice should not be considered as something exclusively trivial, because the mere act of crossing the border without restrictions somehow shaped Yugoslav self-perception and emphasized the Yugoslavs' diversity in respect to other state socialist countries. And this mobility was in many cases connected with Trieste. So there are many initiatives, both bottom-up and institutional. Now I would like to move to another aspect of the Italo-Yugoslav cooperation, that is solidarity ties that developed as a response to natural disasters, which I am currently exploring in the framework of the ERC research project, Humanitarianism and Mediterranean Europe. I would say that the frequency of natural disasters, especially the frequency of earthquakes, was another commonality between the two countries. And perhaps this shared sense of vulnerability contributed in fostering empathy for the suffering of the neighbors. From the early 1960s, almost every time a natural or a human-induced disaster hit the territory of the neighboring country, Italy or Yugoslavia sent aid. To my knowledge, it started in 1963 when Italy was part of a huge international mobilization after the Skopje earthquake. But in 1963, we also have Yugoslav aid, the Yugoslav mission, which was sent to Italy after the Vajont incident, which was a landslide which hit a dam. It caused a wave which destroyed several villages. So after that, we have many instances. Italy sent aid to Yugoslavia in 1964 after the Zagreb flood, in 1967 after the Debra earthquake, 1969 Banja Luka, 1979 Montenegro. And also Yugoslavia sent aid to Italy after the flood in 1966, after the earthquakes in 1968, in Sicily in 1976, in Friuli, and in 1980 in Campania and Basilicata. And I think that the main feature of solidarity ties was reciprocity. So both countries experienced the situation of being at the same, not at the same time, but in different instances, both providers and recipients of aid. And this reciprocity epitomized the fact that Yugoslavia managed to position itself on an equal footing in respect to its Western neighbor. And in this way, tried and managed to reassess hierarchies. So aid circulated eastward, but it also circulated westward and included not only aid in kind, but also the transfer of knowledge. For instance, seismologists from Skopje, because an institute of earthquake engineering was established in Skopje after the earthquake in 1963. They sent missions to Italy, and also a team of forensic experts from Ljubljana played an important role in the identification of the victims of the Vajont disaster, and also in Sicily in 1968. And it's interesting that throughout the post-World War II period, Italy was the only Western country which received aid from Yugoslavia, and Italy was also an exception for being the only Western country which received aid from the Soviet Union as well. But while probably the aid from the Soviet Union was mainly rooted in channels established by the Italian Communist Party, aid from Yugoslavia was it traveled along governmental rather than party connections. So I'm still working on these issues, but I have the feeling that in both cases, this contributed in improving the image of Yugoslavia. And also somehow it affected the image of Italy, that was increasing the image of Italy in Yugoslavia, because it was increasingly perceived as something different from the other Northwestern countries, which had been traditionally framed as the donors, the donor countries. So the international providers of aid, both through governments or through huge NGOs, and in a framework in which aid traveled from the north to the south, and it was very often shaped by post-imperial reverberation. On the contrary, humanitarian endeavors between Italy and Yugoslavia were framed through the concept of reciprocity, solidarity, and friendship. And it was often stressed the fact that it happened between peers. So what is also interesting in the case of solidarity ties is the fact that they were increasingly shaped not that much from by the relationships between Belgrade and Rome, but rather by regional cooperation and relations between territories which share some commonalities. And we have to bear in mind that the 1970s were a decade of decentralization in both countries. We all know about the Yugoslav decentralization, which culminated in the 1974 constitution. And this decentralization, also regional cross-border cooperation played an important role, because Slovenia and Croatia tested their foreign policy in their relationships with their neighbors. But similarly, Italy underwent a similar process, because the regions were created in 1970 and they gained increasing autonomy in the course of that decade. So for example, the Yugoslav aid to Friuli after the 1976 earthquake was a Slovenian matter. But not only because there were members of the Slovenian minorities living in the area affected by the earthquake, but this was not the only reason. On the other hand, for instance, the Italian region Puglia was on the front line in sending aid to Montenegro after the 1979 earthquake. So good neighborly relations were regarded as the key to overcome a difficult past. And the burden of this past was more present in Yugoslavia than in the Italian context, because the framework that I described in the Italian context, it was so the issue related to FOIB and Exodus, it was something that it gained relevance on the national level starting from the 1990s. Before that, it was more or less absent from the public discourse. While Yugoslavia, from the end of the Second World War, cultivated the memory of the anti-fascist struggle against the occupants, and in the border area, the memory of the discriminations and persecution operated by the fascist regimes were of course, kept alive. But it's interesting that from the second half of the 1960s, a shared historical memory was rediscovered. And the legacy of the Second World War turned it from a burden into a shared experience and the ground for cooperation. In fact, Italians and Yugoslavs had not always been enemies during the Second World War, because many Yugoslavs fought in the Italian liberation movement. And many Italians fought with Yugoslav partisans. And this memory started to prompt common initiatives, such as, for instance, twinning between Italian and Yugoslav cities. And this has been the topic of recent research by some colleagues, Betty, Kapski-Korica, and Flavian. So in Yugoslavia, of course, the liberation movement was one of the main pillars of the ideological framework. But it's interesting that in Italy, the legacy of anti-fascism was increasingly institutionalized in the course of the 1970s. And this would continue in the 1980s, especially when Sandro Pertini was president, so until 1985. Pertini had been a partisan leader. He met Tito, and he repeatedly spoke about the affinity that he felt for the Yugoslav president. And this was somehow captured by a gesture that he made during Tito's funeral, because he put his hand on Tito's coffin. So in this presentation, I try to highlight how a slow rapprochement between Italy and Yugoslavia started quietly and spontaneously, and it gained traction as soon as the territorial controversy was about to be solved, to grow into a political project, which became very popular in the 1970s and in the 1980s, in which it was presented as one of the most outstanding examples of European detente and cooperation in diversity. This should deserve further investigation, but following the press from both Italy and Yugoslavia, I got the feeling that the Italo-Yugoslav friendship started fading away in the second half of the 1980s, when the economic and political situation in Yugoslavia started deteriorating, and this partnership lose one of its main features, that was being on an equal footing. So Yugoslavia started being increasingly regarded as a sick man and a country in need of support and in need of aid. So the 1990s were a turning point in every aspect. I have already mentioned what happened in the Italian politics of memory, but if we look at the post-Yugoslav area, we can see that the new cultures of memory, which had very different and often conflicting agendas, all of them were unwilling to integrate the legacy of this past friendship and cooperation during the Cold War, but rather they chose to focus on the conflict. For instance, in Slovenia and Croatia, there is an emphasis on the need to justify, legitimate the annexation of the upper Adriatic territories, drawing alternatively on ethnic or political motivations. While in Serbia, there is an emphasis on the alliance between the Italian army and the Czechoslovak movement, which is often framed as affinity between the two peoples, while for both it was a tactical alliance with the aim of anti-partisan repression. So if we look at the historical landscape on both sides of the Adriatic, I think that there are not that many positive examples of coping with the past, but one could detect some of them. For instance, in 2020, there was a joint commemoration between the president of Italy and the president of Slovenia, in which both acknowledged the suffering of their neighbors in the past. And in 2025, Gorizia and Nova Gorizia will be the European capitals of culture, for the first time to cities jointly rather than one city. But still, if we look at the main discursive framework, and probably it's you can see it from the picture, especially from the Italian side, the discourse revolves around the image of divided cities, the southern Berlin, while Gorizia and Nova Gorizia were not Berlin, because there was no wall from the area. There was a border, but it was definitely no wall, starting from the early 1960s, because crossing the border was part of everyday life of the inhabitants of both border areas. So once again, the memory of this Adriatic detente fell into oblivion. If we look at the scholarship, I think that many things happened in the last 15 to 10 years. So scholarship started exploring the Adriatic detente. I will just mention an edited volume on this topic with authors from both Italy and the post-Yugoslav area. The book by Sasha Micic on the Adriatic detente, the works by Carlo Ružičić Kessler. Anita Buchin and I, we both dealt with Italy, Yugoslavia, and pop culture, and also Petar Dradicic dealt with the image of Yugoslavia. So there is some literature on this cross-border cooperation, circulation of cultural trend and whatever. And there are also two research projects currently unfolding. One is in Italy and the other in Slovenia. So we can only speculate why, despite this scholarly attention for the Adriatic detente, its memory is absent from the mainstream public discourse. And I think that I kept reflecting on this while I was preparing this presentation. I think that one explanation might lie in the fact that in the European framework of memory, which is based on the representation of the Cold War as a struggle between liberalism and totalitarianism, the 1970s detente does not fit. And also anti-fascism very often feels uncomfortable. Also, the conflict, the war that originated with the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has brought to the fore a narrative on the Cold War in which diplomacy is completely disregarded. And yeah, so I think, but I'm also curious about your feedback on this topic. So I think that there are no lessons that can be drawn from these case studies from the case study of the Italo-Yugoslav relations. But we can only acknowledge the fact that in that context, a rapprochement took place without much conceptualization, at least in the beginning, despite issues which were still open, and despite a different political system, but starting from the idea that both countries would only benefit from new avenues of cooperation. And if we move to another context, the post-Yugoslav area, it has been noted that pop culture features high among the elements pushing towards a reconciliation. For instance, there are several studies on the role of Yugo rock, this shared memory. And also works in particular, I'm thinking about an article by Tanya Petrovic on the 2014 flooding. She has explored solidarity ties which emerge in the region in cases of natural disasters. And this has also been noticed recently with the last flooding in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'm wondering whether we should reflect more on the potential for reconciliation of some practices that might sound trivial or depoliticized, while they are not depoliticized at all, because cultural solidarity, of course, are political, but in a different way, in a way that very often is able to avoid instrumentalization. And the last reflection that I wanted to share with you relates to scholarship. I believe that looking at the transnational history of Italo-Yugoslav relations, I think that this comparison might contribute to deconstruct the rigid boundaries of the area studies, because both countries were located at the border of Cold War areas, the West or the East. Of course, we all know that Yugoslavia was not part of the Soviet bloc, but also Italy stood out for its peculiarity within the Western bloc. It was not only because of that, but also because it had a communist party which reached 35% in the mid-1960s. But similarities do not stop here. I think that Italy was seen as a country much closer to Yugoslavia than other European countries because they share some features and they share some problems as well. Both countries experienced a dramatic economic boom from the mid-1950s, starting from low standards. And they've experienced a radical change in their society in a short time with the fast industrialization, fast urbanization, but with public policies which were not able to keep up the tempo of these developments. They experienced a patriarchal society, which was challenged by changing habits, by the new consumer culture. In both countries, rural areas and the South were still haunted by the specter of backwardness. And for instance, Sasha Micic refers to this dialogue between Italy and Yugoslavia regarding the question of the South. And also Italian and Yugoslav workers found themselves together in Western Germany factories, in mines in Belgium, and so on. So I think that no surprise that Italy was regarded in Yugoslavia as a kind of transit zone, a place of passage towards other countries of Western Europe. And it was very interesting to me that, and now I'm drawing towards the conclusion, I came across a document in the diplomatic archive produced by the Yugoslav consulate in Milan, which was about Yugoslav citizens who found themselves in Milan, and they applied for visas to reach France, Western Germany, and Switzerland. And in that document, those countries were called like the real West, the real abroad. And that phrase was very interesting to me because somehow epitomized the fact that Italy was regarded as something in the middle between abroad and Yugoslavia. And I think, and this is the very, very, very last thing, this is also important for Yugoslav studies as a whole, because Yugoslavia has been either regarded as a unique case, so there is plenty studies of Yugoslavia's exceptionalism, which of course it makes sense, or it has been analyzed in comparison with other state socialist countries. There is a huge debate on area studies because the main critique is that the structure of area studies is shaped by power hierarchies by Western readers. It's an effort by Western readers to make distant case studies readable, and that the same act of inserting a country in a certain area affect the interpretation of phenomena, the important pattern, and so on. But on the other hand, I think that we have to acknowledge the interdisciplinarity that very often area studies allow. So my argument here is that scholarship on Yugoslavia would benefit from an approach considering the position of the country at the intersection of different areas. So being part of different networks of relations. So Yugoslavia as an Eastern European countries, as a Central European country, but also as a Mediterranean country. And I believe that Yugoslavia's history can be better understood when explored through its relationships with its Western neighbor, Italy. And I think that more broadly, reflection on the achievements and deficiencies of the Yugoslav project would also benefit from a comparison with other Mediterranean countries that went with similar phenomena in the same year. So I think I'm slightly out of time, but I wanted to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Shall we go with in English how do you prefer?
Ne mogu postaviti pitanja,
Ok,
sigurno.
možemo da. Onda ćemo da pitanja možemo na srpskom i hrvatskom, i onda odgovorit ću. Ništa, taj uvek prvo vama dajem reč. Ako imate pitanja, komentare, i evo Vlada već. Uključite ovi.
Surprisingly, I was picked. Hvala na predavanju i čestitke za knjigu koju sam, kao što reče Irena, dao njoj na poklon i čekam da ona meni pozajmi da je pročitam. Tako da se izvinjam što nisam pročitao knjigu, jer sam je samo prelistao. Maybe I should switch to English now. Yeah. Well, somehow it's easier to comment on what you said in English. Well, I'm also a live witness of these rapprochement between Yugoslavia and Italy in the 50s, late 50s, mid 50s and late 50s. But I remember also, for example, one of my earliest memories from childhood is that my parents took me. We were living in Slovenia at the time, in Ljubljana. They took me to a demonstration, which was on the issue of Trst, and the whole crowd was marching and shouting "Trst je naš." This was before London Memorandum, and I remember I asked. It was somehow late afternoon, and I was asking my parents, can they hear us in Trieste, what we are shouting? I thought that it was so close to Ljubljana that they could hear that we are shouting that Trst je naš, Trst is Yugoslav. So this is one memory. The other memory is TV. This is more culture. In the early years of Yugoslav television, there was one day per week without Yugoslav program, because probably the Yugoslav television didn't have enough resources or technical means to cover every evening the full program. So on that day, and I think it was Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, they took a RAI program, and it was transmitted on Yugoslav channels, and it was Studio Uno, this review show. And of course, this was spectacular, although these TVs were not in color, but black and white. And I remember the Kessler sisters, who were dancers, who looked totally un-Italian, and they were not Italian as far as I remember. Their name suggests they were blonde, long legs, and so on. But they were one of the attractions of the show, and of course, pop singers and so on. And then another show was made in Yugoslavia, in Croatia, in Zagreb, as a copy of that show, and the director was Croatian TV director, but I think from Istria, who was originally Italian, Anton Marti. So there were really strong links, cultural links, because with other states, there was, of course, as you said, British and American pop music and pop culture influence, but this was also, and in cinematography, I think Italy, there was a period when Italy was almost dominant, not only in co-productions with Yugoslav TV studios, but also popularity of Italian cinema was something which was even at some points bigger than American or French or British movies. So one of the most popular characters or actors from my childhood was Totò, for example, comedies. Then Alberto Sordi, Vittorio Gassman, and all the rest. So it was really something which almost every day somehow was present in Yugoslav space, this closeness to Italy in a way. And what was also interesting, what is well known, of course, but I think it should be mentioned that the biggest economic investment of any country in Yugoslavia was Fiat. They started producing cars which were practically copy of Italian, Popular Seicento, which was 750, Zastava 750, and then later other 1300 and other types of cars. So, and also I think Yugoslavia profited from copying the Italian textile and shoe industry, making, of course, not so high quality as Italian, but quite decent, so to say, products, which they were then selling in the Eastern Bloc, especially in the Soviet Union. So this was huge export of Yugoslav shoes and textile and garments to Soviet Union, which were practically, I think, designed after Italian models. So I think this should be added to this strong cultural links between the two countries. Now I don't have a specific question. Of course, there were other more complex issues, for example, especially in the 90s and after the after the breakup of Yugoslavia. Somehow relations became a bit complicated because the past was also reinterpreted. For example, in Serbia, Italian occupation during the Second World War is presented much more favorably than in Croatia and Slovenia in particular, where there is still a condemnation of fascist regime. But in Serbian historiography, frequently it's mentioned that Italians protected Serbs in independent state of Croatia from Ustashvili and so on, in Dalmatia in particular. So there is a mixed, somehow mixed approach to this very delicate period, and I think there is a mutual, so to say, effort from the three main republics to put the blame on foibles on other nations, not on that it was the Yugoslav army doing it, not Slovenian or Croatian, and on the other side. There were accusations of Croats from that they were most, so to say, active in this practice. So these are issues which still divide not only today's Italy and Yugoslav successor states, especially after the election of Meloni, although she somehow was more moderate than expected, but still she insists on this of those who are in the government with her. So there are somehow today, I think the relations are a bit more complex because of the past, not so much because of the present. I spoke too long, but I would just want to mention one detail. I received by coincidence the other day email from my former colleague, younger than me, Italian, who is from Trieste, and he found that there was in the 50s or early 60s, there was an Italian ship which sailed daily from Istria to Trieste called Elda or something like this, which was a regular. I knew about bus tours to Trieste, shopping tours, but this was an Italian liner, quite good looking. I mean, a very nice ship, which could take 500 passengers, which was operating between Istrian ports, Pula, Rovinj, and other ports to Trieste, mainly for shopping trips. So this is a detail that I didn't know because I knew about the buses, cars, and trains and so on, but not about the special maritime line. So that's my contribution. And once again, thank you for choosing this topic as a topic for your research and for the book that you produced. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Slađana Sredojević. I'm an economist and editor of one journal, Banking, Bankarstvo, which is issued from 1971 by the Association of Serbian Banks. I'm also very happy to have this opportunity today, and I would like to congratulate Irena and the Institute for having this initiative, and of course you, Francesca, for having this recognition of how important it is to come physically to Serbia and Belgrade. I have the book, and I'm impressed by the analysis I found it there, and also your presentation today. And as an economist, I'm also lecturing economy, so I'm really impressed by the ability to put the things in the context, as Irena said at the beginning of this day. While observing this relationship, actually, we understand much more than that. And it's very useful for us as economists. And this is my first impression, fantastic choice for the research, as colleague Vlada just said. It's absolutely needed even today. And maybe sometimes we consider some historical overviews like, okay, it is about nice past, but this absolutely has a value added for today's context. Just 2 days ago, similar contribution was published by Italian ambassador in Serbia, Luca Gori. His Excellency, with the director of the World Bank office, they wrote together the book Greater Europe, EU Enlargement from Western Balkan to Ukraine. It was promoted, it is in Italian language now, but it will be translated in Serbian and English, it was agreed, and promotion was within this book fair in Belgrade. And I found similarities, actually talking about this context. Thank you for this contribution. It is much more than scientific and historical review. It has a huge impact on us and triggering our thinking on how we can contribute back from all your Italian community, let's say, abroad and here. And before I put your little question, I would like also to mention that in economic side and financial sector side, cooperation with Italy is very intense. And we do benefit from this historical that we found research also in Banking magazine and other sources, these close ties that also you mentioned, exploration of Italian practice market banks, but also one of the visionary writers in that time was also Professor Života Ristic, for example, Dragoslav Vukovic. They were exploring the innovative markets abroad, especially in 70s and 80s. We'll see it in Banking Journal. And today, as I said, financial sector is also following, and we have Italian banks operating in Serbia. So economic community and embassies, as I said officially, that we know is absolutely in favor of this know-how transfer, technology transfer, etc. And I would like to see your, as author of this fantastic piece, what would be your message to us? Like scholars, you gave very well your conclusions at the end. How do you see relevance in studies and further research? But your message to us economists and players, how can we contribute today in this bringing to the light better picture of Serbia today and Serbian economy to Italians? And is it related only to pop culture that still is very vivid, but somehow it is fragmented? Our economic collaboration is super active and good, but in a kind of general public, maybe it is not known enough, in Italy especially. So what we can do, in your opinion, more with scholars, with these beautiful things, to make it more visible, popular, and that would be maybe my question to you as an author. And again, compliments and to you and to Irena for organizing this fantastic occasion that is inspiring us further. Thank you.
So thank you. dear Francesca, or I shall say also, ciao Francesca, because as you already know, in Serbian or in Belgrade especially, ciao is the usual expression of greetings on everyday basis. I am old enough to recall of Adriano Celentano. Young generation left. So we older know the title of your book is the title of the song. And it was really inspiring, your lecture today, because not before today, I was aware that Italy was probably, I don't know, I would like to hear your opinion, was chosen as a best country role model for ex-communist or ex-socialist Yugoslavia, just because it was the example of some kind of soft capitalism, the mixture of pop culture, the mixture of the consumer economy, the mixture of cultural pattern that is really Mediterranean. It is we have been and we are Balkan countries, but ex-Yugoslavia was also belonging to the Mediterranean civilization circle. And what is your opinion? You have shown us the pictures of Josip Broz Tito with Sofia Loren. He has a picture with another great film star, the film stars like Elizabeth Taylor, for example. But what do you think? Did communist rulers have chosen Italy as an example that will create pro-Western mental maps, as you use that expression, on purpose? Because you know what for Eastern Germans, television on Western side of Germany, that was for us Sanremo, that was for us Dolce Vita movies, songs. So what do you think? Did they chosen Italy for purpose? Thank you.
Marko Milenkovic, I'm fellow here at the Institute of Social Sciences. Many thanks. I learned a lot and enjoyed the lecture very much. And I mean, in a way, it's very symbolic. We are having the lecture this week, as on this weekend there's going to be a celebration of 70 years of Trieste's return to Italy. So it's really symbolic. And today I've learned of your ERC project, and I think you're working on a super interesting topic. And the question I have from your presentation, which really attracted my attention, is this aspect of regional cooperation. You mentioned between the regions of Italy and Yugoslavia. In the context of this decentralization, we kind of had in both countries in 60s, then 70s. So my question is, how much are you going to work on this aspect? And is it possible to explore to which extent this is happening outside of central government? So what is the influence and interference of central governments in this cooperation and this concrete aid which you point to in this particular research? But looking forward to answers to all the other questions and comments. But I think they are really important. A wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Hvala na svim ovim pitanjima i hvala na lijepim rečima. To mi puno znači. Opet ću preći na engleski. I will try to be very brief in order to allow another round of comments if there is any. So many thanks for these suggestions that are very important to me. And I have to say that I was very happy when the book was translated into Serbian. It was like a story that was coming back to the place where it belonged. Even if at that time I already had extensively published in English, but still only articles, and the book is different. So I was very grateful to Geopoetica and to the Italian Institute of Culture, which supported this translation. Actually, wow, so many food for thought. I will just start with my notes. I will start with the vignette that you depicted with your family at demonstration. Yeah, that's also part of the story, of course, and it was very fascinating to me that within few years, within few months, Italy turned it into like the enemy #1 in Yugoslavia against which demonstrations were organized in the border area. And in the border area, they were organized in order to be seen from the other side of the border. Of course, in Ljubljana, they couldn't hear, but at the very border, Italian population saw what was happening on the other side of the border, and how did this change in a very short time. I also had the opportunity to interview an old lady who unfortunately passed away. Who was Italian. She had an incredible story because she went back from a concentration camp, and she arrived in Belgrade. She met her future husband, and she stayed here. And she was from Trieste, half Italian, half Slovenian, and but she was identified as an Italian in the time of the worst anti-Italian attitude in Yugoslavia. But she mentioned the fact that she was somehow she was ona se pomirila sa time. I think that she used this phrase. I mean, she had her life, and she was also working for Italian Institute. Maybe it was no, I'm not sure, because maybe that was later. Anyway, she recalled the fact that every time her next door neighbor, when she met her, she said like Bella Giuchello, because Bella was the Italian prime minister. But this changed in a very short time. So Italy, in a very short time, turned it from this very negative picture into a kind of place which was very often imagined, and this is the argument I'm trying to make in the book, the fact that the Italy that was dreamt about was the Italy, it was a dream world which was shaped, drawing on the expectations that Yugoslavia had for itself, that were somehow positioned across the border. Like everything in Italy is brighter, is like nicer, but still it resembles Yugoslavia. It's not that different from Poland. So this aspect of the contrast is very vivid, and it also affected some personal trajectories. For instance, I came across this very nice story of a compositor. He was Ljubo Kuntarić, He won the first Zagreb music contest, which was organized in Zagreb in 1953, more or less with the same model as the Sanremo Festival. So he won because at that time compositors used to win the competitions, but he got to know that he was the winner only 1 month after that because he was mobilized at the border with Italy. So he was a soldier at that time. And there was the crisis in 1953 with both armies mobilized on both sides of the border. And that same compositor, exactly 10 years after that, he won a very prestigious award in Italy. And there are other similar stories. Regarding the TV, the broadcasting of Italian TV stations, yeah, that was significant as well. There is the case of Anton Martin is very telling because he was one of those mediators. He was from Istria, from Labin, I guess, but he was located in Italy, so he was the proper mediator for that situation. And very often, again, what came from Italy was not only genuinely Italian pop culture, but also Western trends. So for instance, there was a very popular TV show, Lascia Raddoppia, and Mike Buongiorno. He was the son of Italian immigrants. He was born in the US, so he was accommodating these US trends in the Italian context, and then this model was more acceptable in the Yugoslav context. So again, this role of mediation. The role of cinema, yeah, I completely agree. Although I think that we have to bear in mind that those were the pioneers of the Italian cinema. So Italian cinema was particularly appreciated in Yugoslavia, but still it was also very popular worldwide. This was a phase which was something that won't happen never again in the future. The economic investments, of course, as Astava reach this relationship with Torino, which also affected. I never explored it, but I think that there were also some connection with Kragujevac and Torino, and also Yugoslavia, yeah, somehow adapting Italian products to its context and exporting them to the Soviet bloc that happened with many items, including the foodstuff, comfort food, Eurocrem. Eurocrem was based on Italian. Plasma, yeah. Plasma. Yeah, the 1990s again as a turning point. Yeah, this is a very complex story with everyone putting the blame on someone else, and this very different memory of the Italian occupation. Yeah, it's part of the. I think it's part of the. It's functional to these main national narratives, although as it happens. As it often happens with stereotypes, there is some truth in it because the Italian occupation was not the same in the NDH, in the independent state of Croatia, or in Slovenia, because in some situations the Italian army did protect the Serbian population from Ustasha. And in that context, they didn't want to annex those areas. So the Italian occupation was much more violent in the areas which were foreseen as part of the kingdom of Italy. And but still, I don't think that it was based on any affinity because, for instance, the Italian army was very harsh in the repression of the partisan movement in the Gorski Kotar area, in which Serbs played a huge role. So among the deportees from that area, there were many Serbs, and in Montenegro as well. Yeah. So it was more political and tactical alliances than economic cooperation. This is also a huge issue, and also thank you for suggesting this recently published book. I'm not sure how we as scholars could contribute to deliver a different image, and I think that yeah, translations, cultural context can certainly help. I think that something has been done in the last 2 decades, and not much more is to be done. And of course, yeah, popular culture can play a huge role. There are, for instance, many co-productions between Italy and Serbia. So, for instance, that is something that could be developed further. If for condition that it's an equal footing, because that's also interesting of this story, that very often these relationships are uneven with Serbia, like included in economic relationships, but in the framework of okay, when a company decentralizes its plans in a country where outsourcing, where labor is cheaper. Yeah, so that's not part of this story that I'm trying to. This goes in the opposite direction. And yeah, the idea of Italy as an example of soft capitalism, yeah, that I think that was very present, because Italy was a country where the two main political forces were very much in favor of state intervention, both the Christian Democracy and the Communist Party, which was excluded from the government at the national level, but from the 1970s, it played a role in the regional governments. So it started playing, especially in central Italy, but not exclusively. It started being included in the institutional Italian framework. This was done on purpose by the Yugoslav leadership. I'm not sure. I think that the Yugoslav public was genuinely pro-Western oriented. So they started part of this establishment started their career by repressing any contact with Western countries and controlling, observing, sometimes with a high degree of paranoia what was going on, what were the activities of the foreign embassies or any foreigner in the country. But I think that paradoxically, they observed that much popular culture in those early years that they learned how to play with it, and they understood that it was easier and better to allow most of those trends to enter the country than blocking them. So I think it was out of pragmatism. And the last comments also, yeah, thank you for the issue of regional cooperation. This is something that I am currently trying to explore. I still have to access some sources, but this interplay between the federal government and the republics is very interesting. It has been partially explored for the Slovenian case, and this is very prominent in the case of aid to Friuli after the 1926, because it was the start of a regional project which led to the with the scope of integrated autonomies and create some opportunities for the Yugoslav/Slovenian companies, but it ended up with unexpected consequences. So it was at the end, I think that there wasn't that much space for Slovenian companies, but there was a lot of space opening up for Slovenes in the informal labor market in Friuli, in those areas affected by the earthquake. So this is something I still have to access some sources, but what I came across so far goes in this direction. Personally, I'm also very interested in exploring the trans-Adriatic relations between the two sides. So yeah, so Puglia and Montenegro, because it's something completely forgotten and something completely unexplored. So yeah, thank you so much for all this questions.
Ja bih samo dopunila možda nešto od ovo Dijanino pitanje, ali ne sa svojim, nego ono što je čak i u knjizi Francesca pominje. To pitanje je da li su izabrani namerno ili to. Tu ima jedan i rad od Peđe Markovića na koji se i Francesca koji koristi ovde. Mislim, on je radio onu svoju disertaciju Beograd između istoka i zapada, koja mislim da je njegova najbolja knjiga, o uticaju zapadne kulture, na koji način je to bilo i željeno, a i prosto je bio neki državni plan iza toga. Ali on je više se odnosilo to na Ameriku. Ali on ima taj jedan članak i u Italiji. I on u tom članku, kako sam ja u knjizi sebi, on daje jedno dosta ubedljivo objašnjenje, ali i plastično, i on kaže Italija je percipirana, to smo mi, samo jedna bolja verzija nas. I tu je, mislim, taj nivo identifikacije sa Italijom, ne samo zato što je dobro i geografski, uvek je neki narod, uglavnom ako su odnosi manje više dobri, neki narod osjećamo kao bližim nego sada da se identifikujemo sa, recimo, Dancima. Ali ta identifikacija Jugoslovena s Italijanima, to mislim svako od nas je verovatno čuo kao jao Italijani, oni su tačno, ja znam moja profesorka u srednjoj školi, oni su tačno, ako nisu hladni kao oni sa zapada, ali su sređeniji nego mi, tako da uvijek je ta, ja mislim da je to isto, mislim, dosta doprinalo tome da ta identifikacija sa nečim što nije istok, zapad je, ali opet nije onaj kao hladni, promišljeni, racionalni zapad i da tu ima, da je tu isto deo, to isto deo možda odgovora, zašto Italija, a ne recimo Francuska ili Španija. Ovo je vlada nešto
ideološku, da kažem, komponentu. Postoji jedna epizoda, vrlo interesantna, ja bih rekao, u odnosima Italije i Jugoslavije na ideološkom planu, a to je faza evrokomunizma, tako zvani Enrico Berlinguer. I taj fenomen evrokomunizma koji se razvio i u Italiji pre svega i u Španiji, u Santiago Carillo i tako dalje. I u ideološkim raspravama u Jugoslaviji i unutar Saveza komunista, ja mislim da je bio jedan ambivalentan odnos. S jedne strane, Jugoslavija se, tako da kažem, dičila, odnosno partija se dičila da je ona najliberalnija, posebno u poređenju sa sovjetskom partijom, češkom, bugarskom i tako dalje. I sad pojavljuje se italijanska partija, odnosno ne pojavljuje se, već se menja i postaje vrlo liberalna, liberalnija čak nego ideološki, nego Jugoslovenski savez komunista, tako da s jedne strane liberalni krugovi u Savezu komunista Jugoslaviji pokušavaju da to iskoriste, da se reformiše Jugoslovenska partija, a konzervativni, ja mislim da su onako malo ipak uzdržani i čak malo zaziru od tog evrokomunizma, koji je čak u jednom trenutku, kako se ja sećam, italijanska komunistička partija toliko bila popularna da je malo nedostajalo da dobije izbore i apsolutnu većinu i da nije bilo američke intervencije koju je, ja mislim, strateški osmišljavao Kissinger, pošto on kasnije rekao Amerika nikad ne bi dozvolila da komunisti uđu u vladu u Italiju u to vreme hladnog rata. Tako da je to, ja mislim, isto jedna vrlo interesantna epizoda u odnosima dve zemlje i tadašnjih vladajuće stranke i jedine stranke u Jugoslaviji. A ovo, kad se govori o regionalnoj toj saradnji, isto interesantno da je, recimo, inicijative kao Alpe Adria, pa onda pentagonala, prvo trilaterala, pa pentagonala i tako dalje, da je to već vreme, tako da kažem, kada Jugoslavija se onako urušava. I isto je bio ambivalentan odnos, jer je tako da kažem, u Beogradu, u centru, je to se isto gledalo kao pozitivno, ali i kao nešto što Slovenija i Hrvatska iskorišćavaju da što pre se nekako otkače. Tako da, naravno, Jugoslavija kao celina učestvovala u pentagonali, ali to je isto jedan kompleksan fenomen koji nije crno-beli, kako bi izgledao. I konačno jedna oblast gde ja mislim da je postojao rivalitet, a čak i animozitet između Jugoslavije i Italije, a to je bio sport. Jer ja se sećam da su utakmice između klubova iz Jugoslavije i Italije se tada vrlo često završavale incidentima, tučama, prekidima. Isto tako su se jugoslovenski navijači i fudbaleri žalili da ih je Italija, ovako grubo rečeno, pokrala u nekim ključnim utakmicama kao za evropsko prvenstvo u Italiji 68. i na olimpijadi u Rimu. Tako da je bio rivalitet, ali s druge strane su jugoslovenski igrači odlazili u Italiju i tamo postajali veoma popularni. Tako da je sport isto povezivao, ali je tu bio isto jedan prilično ovako kompetitivan odnos između dve zemlje i mase navijača, pošto su slični Italijanima, upravo u istim sportovima, izuzimajući biciklizam, Jugosloveni bili najzagrejaniji za fudbal, vaterpolo, košarku, tako da su to bili rivali. A sada Slovenija naravno predstavlja bivšu Jugoslaviju na najbolji mogući način u biciklizmu, a Italija joj ne može prići. Trenutno. Hvala.
To je za fudbal prošle godine kad je bilo ovo pre 2 godine svetsko prvenstvo u fudbalu, Italija nije bila kvalifikovana i onda je u jednom trenutku kružilo na internetu, društvenim mrežama, pretpostavljam, kao predlog za koga navijati kao Italijan, i onda su sastavili 11 igrača čak samo iz Srbije i kao, pa eto, to najviše ima kao srpski nacionalni igrača reprezentacije pri igri Italiji kao Pajmus. Tako da.
Da, hvala što ste spomenuli eurokomunizam, naravno i to je deo ove priče. Mislim da ima niz događaja koji možda počinju od 68. godine kad je došlo do sovjetske invazije u Čekoslovačkoj. Ja mislim da baš u tog trenutka to je puno doprinio zbližavanju Italije i Jugoslavije, jer su baš osjećali tu zajedničku pretnju i od tada je i Italija razumjela koliko je korisno imati neku Jugoslaviju sa svoje zapadne strane i taj ambivalentan odnos sa talijanskim komunistima. Ja mislim da je isto zanimljivo da odnosi su bili i dalje ambivalentni, ali su bili značajni i sa članovima hrišćanske demokracije, između Jugoslavije i hrišćanske demokracije. I na lokalnom nivou, na primjer u Friuli, Venezia Giulia, i na nacionalnom nivou Aldo Moro je u stvari bio ubeđen da mora što brže doći do rješenja graničnog pitanja. Pa nije bio sposoban da to zaključi krajem 60-ih, ali baš je vjerovao da to zakoči taj odnos. A i sport, da, to mi je bilo, vrlo često sam dobila tu kritiku da sam morala se baviti sportom u knjizi i slažem se. Problem je što ja kao osoba nemam nikakvo interesovanje za nikakav sport i mislim da zbog toga sam propustila tu priliku. Ali sigurno sport i popularna kultura su baš dva slična polja. Da.
Ok, dobro. Evo
još jedno pitanje lične prirode za vas kao istraživača ove priče cele naše jugoslovenske i srpske. Da li vam je bilo teško da naučite naš jezik kada ste i da li se to desilo pre nego što ste napisali svoj doktorat ili tokom pisanja doktorata, kad je došlo do toga, inače da zaista govorite izvanredno, kako je i rekla na početku. Evo, pošto znam da nije lako za Italijane da...
Ovih dana sam nekako izgubljena između ekavice i jekavice, jer sam najviše bila u Hrvatskoj, pa sad uglavnom sam više izložena ekavicom i onda sve nekako se meša u moje glavi. Pa, u stvari, naučila sam u Beogradu, kad sam bila ovdje prvi put, pohađala sam neki kurs, pa sam nastavila sam sa jednim kursom koji sam bila u Sarajevu i tada sam progovorila i sam počela da se služim na jeziku. Ne znam, meni se čini da, pošto sam bila mnogo mlađa i pošto sam non-stop sam se družila s prijateljima, sve je bilo nekako prirodno. Mislim, u odnosu sa drugim jezicima koji sam naučila i koji sam pokušala naučiti, nekako je teklo prirodno. Ja, da. Da. Da.
Ok, ako više nema pitanja, hvala još jedan put na dolasku, na predavanju. i vidimo se mi ovde već možda iduće nedelje. Mitja Velikonja će govoriti sledeće srede. A sa Franceskom nadam se isto u nekoj budućnosti opet na drugu temu. Hvala.
Hvala vam puno.